Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Backstage Bikini podcast with your host, Jade.
And this is Grace.
And today we've got an incredible guest on the podcast, all the way from the other side of the pond. We have the head coach of Pro Physique and a specialist in bikini prep coaching and physique development. We have Paul Revelia. Hi, Paul.
How are you guys?
Good. Thank you so much for popping on. We finally got you on with the time difference and stuff. It was mental, but yeah, we appreciate you coming on and thank you again for your time.
No, I appreciate it. You guys, I've enjoyed listening to your podcast, so I'm happy to be on.
Amazing.
Brilliant. So Paul, obviously, thank you for your time. And we really want to introduce you properly to the listeners over in the UK, because obviously your specialism and your sort of experience and your existence is predominantly in the US. So do you want to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your background, why, and how you got specifically into bikini coaching?
All right. It's a long and boring story, but I'll give you guys the gist of it. So in 2007, I decided I was going to do a bodybuilding show, and I hired a guy named Lane Norton to be my coach. Most people are familiar with Lane. You know, he's gone on to do other things, but back then he was a grad student, primarily coaching. And once he got into coaching with me, I got very interested in the whys and hows of coaching. And in 2008, I believe it was, or 2009, he moved to Tampa, where I'm from. And so we became pretty good friends in 2008, 2009. His family moved down here. Our wives became very good friends, kids, all that stuff started mingling. And along the way, he became a very well-known coach. To the point where he was getting overwhelmed and inundated with inquiries. And so he thought I would be a good fit for coaching, because of the way I looked at things and my approach. And so eventually I had a whole other career, and I was not really interested in coaching. And you got to remember, this is back. I know now people have a whole goal of being a coach online. Back then, it was like you had to convince people to do it. They would be like, well, why should I work with a coach on the internet? Lane was just so well known that people were just basically throwing money at him saying, please coach me. So because of him, I was able to build up a business early on. But early on, I coached power lifters, soccer moms. I mean, some male competitive bodybuilders. I actually competed in 2008, 2009, 2012. I earned professional status with multiple organizations, won some overalls. I had a good amount of success, and I think a lot of that helped my business, right? So people saw me and thought, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. But when I started coaching, I had severe imposter syndrome, right? I'm like, my friend Lane here has a PhD. I've got a master's degree in business. What am I doing in coaching? So I actually went back to school at USF under Dr. Bill Campbell, who still has an amazing program here in Tampa. And he focuses on physique enhancement. Whereas if you're familiar with the field of exercise science, a lot of it is based around endurance athletes or athletes that compete in competitive events like, baseball or football, and how to design training programs and nutrition programs around that. Physique sports are so unique that there is really not any research on it. It's very limited. It's mostly case studies. But going back and just understanding the basics and the foundations of the human body, exercise, physiology, strength and conditioning, kinesiology, these are the things that I went back and studied. It really helped me feel more comfortable being a coach. And then you realize the nuance as you get into coaching competitors. A lot of it just comes down to experience, seeing how different things work with different people. Around that time, flexible dieting or macro tracking was becoming a little bit trendy. But even then, when I first started competing, people told me, like, you can't track macros and be successful. And I was like, well, I just won the whole show. So, and they're like, well, you're just a genetic freak. And I'm like, no, I'm a tall, skinny basketball player trying to play bodybuilding. So, it's now that macro tracking is not considered like this off the wall theory, right? So I got in early on a lot of these foundational things that are now a part of the sport. And Lane started pointing out to me that there were a lot of teams, coaching teams, I put air quotes up because I call them more like coaching mills, right? Where they would literally have 1,000 clients and give them all the same plans. That was regular practice. And Lane hated that with a passion. So that became kind of his focus. So along the way, he started to get the attention of competitors in the NPC and the IFBB. And once that happened, the floodgates opened. And that's kind of how I transitioned into coaching more in the NPC and the IFBB, because what I've found is that if you coach a male competitor, let's say I have a guy come to me and he goes and wins the world championships, right? I've had athletes go win the world championships at natural bodybuilding. There's not really a group of men that hang out and talk about this stuff. Men are kind of singular, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas along comes a bikini competitor who does well. She tells every one of her friends, oh my gosh, you got to be on my team and work with my coach, right? So this community amongst the women is so much stronger than amongst the men, you know, in my experience. So once I started getting into, you know, I had a few bikini competitors. I remember the first time I went to nationals, I had no idea what I was doing, right? My girl looked great. She had great conditioning and all that, but posing, hair, makeup, tan, heels, suit, none of it made any sense to me. But I got pretty lucky. So in 2014, one of my close friends, her name is Lauren Conlon. She's also she was going to USF at the same time as me. She won the overall at our biggest national show, the Nationals in Miami. And after that, I hired her. I said, hey, will you help me whenever I have a bikini competitor with posing and makeup and hair? Because she obviously knew how to do that. And that was kind of my entry around 2014 into coaching some bikini. But really in the last 3 years is where it's taken off. 3 years ago, I had my first bikini Olympian. This year I had 4. And so now it's like, now I'm really honed in and I really only coach bikini competitors at this point. It really does help you too when you're, you know, programming nutrition training, talking about the psychology, the strategy of competing, understanding the judging criteria. When you're only focused on one division, it does help. So that's how we got here. Along the way, I started a business, Pro Physique. It was just me 10 years ago. Now we have 30 coaches, 39 employees. We have our own gym here in Tampa. So, you know, like there's other aspects to the business. We're not just a competition prep company. We also have lifestyle, probably far majority lifestyle, but the focus tends to be the competitors because they're, you know, they're more visible. So yeah, that's, you know, I got 3 kids and a lovely wife and, you know, things are good, but I'm just continue pushing for more.
Incredible. In terms of, like, obviously you said how you got into bikini. Did you ever, I suppose, think that bikini was going to be the route? Because at the end of the day, like we talk about it all the time in the podcast, like us females and especially bikini competitors, we're very complex individuals, you know. So you kind of have to, I suppose, love it. But did you know that was the route you were going to take when it came to coaching?
No, you know, honestly, the early years, I was a professional natural bodybuilder and I had a lot of men coming to me to coach them to go be professional natural bodybuilders. Natural bodybuilding really took off here in the, you know, the 2010 to 14 range. So that's really where I thought it was going to happen, you know, for me. But I also I had competitors competing at like the national level at powerlifting meets. I competed in powerlifting. So for me, there wasn't like this niche where I was just focused on one thing. My only, you know, thing that I really liked focusing on was I like to understand what somebody's goal was and help them create the vision and then create how we're going to get to that vision. It's really only over the last few years that I've started focusing on bikini. And I think, you know, a lot of it has to do with the fact that I see some of the terrible coaching practices that women go through, and women are just willing to suffer like no other. Men will be like, yeah, that's stupid, I'm not doing it. Women will literally stay on a bad diet, a bad training program, bad protocols for years because they're loyal and their community is doing it as well. They like to suffer together. They like, hey girl, I've only had tilapia for the last 3 days too. Cool. But it's not cool. So like for me, it's also been kind of fun to like show that you can do things a certain way and still reach the top of the sport, because that I've been told over and over throughout my career, you'll never do this because you do macros. You'll never do this because your girls are natural. You'll never do this because X, Y, Z. And now I'm on the verge of having somebody win the Olympia. And, you know, I'm not saying all my girls are natural, but my point is like, you can do things your way and figure out ways to do this sport sustainably. And that's what I enjoy, is having a girl come in and out of a prep and be healthy the whole time. That really makes me happy.
Yeah, we talk about longevity all the time on this podcast, and you know the coaching is ultimately the most important thing, and how you treat the client. And we see it so often, you know, bikini girls come in, they do a season and then they never compete again because of the experience that they had. So it's really, really good to hear, I suppose, how you treat bikini athletes, because like you said, there's a lot of teams out there, and the athletes are just a number at the end of the day, when in fact, you know, as bikini athletes, we need to be cared for. You know, we can be very, very sensitive and vulnerable a lot of the time. And I think coaching is a massive, massive part of your experience within this sport, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, the bikini division, I think because it's the entry level division, requires the least amount of muscle to compete, but it's still bodybuilding. And I think the frequency with which people compete, especially in the age of social media, is a lot higher, because you can get addicted to the feedback and the information and that you're putting out, and you get a lot more attention when you are lean, when you are dieting. When you are taking a year of improvements, it's not as exciting. There's not this week over week change. You're not so hyper focused on the scale and the body fat measurements. You're focused on building. But, you know, that's one good thing about being a little bit older, is when I competed in the sport in 2007-8, there was no social media. You didn't do a show but once every year. Like, that's what I was taught. You get on stage, you see how you look, you take a year or two off, and you come back. Right. So that's something I try to preach to my athletes, is like, let's focus on a window of time to get on stage and then get off and come back better. So, you know, that really helps the longevity. If you're doing shows back-to-back years, it gets harder and harder on the body.
Yeah, a lot of things need to be nurtured, like not just the physical improvements, but mental as well. Do you know, the psychology of the athlete is so important. But I want to talk about, so you said you got into bikini in it's 2014, you said. How, because a lot has changed in that time frame. I know bikini kind of originally started in the US around 2012, and it slowly has made its way over to the UK, and I feel like we're a little bit behind in that sense. But how have you found the involvement of bikini since you kind of started, and how have you kind of adapted your approach along the way?
Yeah, I think my natural transition into coaching bikini competitors was, they were the ones that would come to me would be basically being coached by people that coached bodybuilders, right? So they were being treated the same as bodybuilders. Whereas coaches like myself and Lane and some of the other early bikini, you know, kind of coaches over here, we were adapting the training program specifically to females, right? We were making sure that the training was specific to what they needed. We also, you know, what I found with the early bikini competitors, everybody was doing the same thing. They were all dieting hard on lots of cardio, very low calories. It was almost like just a weight loss competition. Whereas we treated our bikini competitors like bodybuilders, right? We made sure they had muscle. We made sure they were full on stage. And I think that look has prevailed. Now the judging in the US, you hear it all the time. They want the girls full. Look at 5-6 years ago. They were stringy. They were over dieted. They were, you know, taking diuretics and flat on show day. But they were girls that had genetics to overcome that, right? So something I say all the time is, oftentimes competitors are winning in spite of their coach. You know, they just happen to have elite genetics that even when they're depleted, dehydrated, and over dieted, they still look better than 99% of the competitors out there. Then you get them with a good coach, and you know, it's all over. And I think that's what I'm really loving about the bikini standard that they're setting right now. You can't be super hard. You can't be super dry. They want full round with great shape. And so for me, it's been fun for me to be involved with the promoters and judges the last 3 years at the highest level, because it's kind of like, once you get an athlete, and obviously I'm talking about Daraja at that level, it's a whole different experience as a coach, because now the judges and promoters and everyone's talking to me saying, this is what we want to see. Whereas I didn't know that before. It was almost like a secret club, right? Like, you know, but to be fair, the judges want everyone to be successful. They want all the athletes on stage to look the best they can look. And they have a vision in their mind. And, you know, it's very rewarding when you walk off stage at a pro show and the judges come backstage and they go, you nailed it. Or they say, too hard, too soft. You know, like, they'll tell you, you know, they tell you exactly what they want. But I do love the direction that they're taking with bikini. It's very hard in a sport like bodybuilding, where the whole idea of bodybuilding is progress, right? Like, if you look at the bodybuilders, every year they get bigger and harder and bigger and harder. Bikini, they really have to keep people here. They have to keep them in this standard. Yeah. And I think that's why you've had 5 years in a row now a different champion, because someone like Issa won in 2019 or 2018 when she won. Everyone went, oh, Jesus, no one's ever going to beat her. But it was hard for her to repeat that. She hasn't repeated that look since, maybe a little bit at Tampa, but she's grown and she hasn't quite it's very hard. You almost have to stop training. You know, I think someone like Janet Liu, who I'm pretty close with now, she lives close by. She takes months off from the gym from
Wow.
trying to progress, you know, because good athletes, if they keep lifting all the time, are going to put on more muscle. So they do a good job keeping bikini.
Yeah.
And I think we commented on it, and we saw it. We did a little bit of a review of the Olympia this year, and I think we commented at the time, and you could really see it, I feel, in the Olympia lineup this year. Unfortunately, those athletes that did come in that slightly bit harder and a little bit more dense, I'm thinking Janet actually came in quite hard for her, in my opinion, and also Laura Lee came in a little bit flatter. Obviously, she filled up for finals, but I think in the placings, especially because we as UK athletes, and much like the US, we follow that lineup, we follow those champions for a reason, because they set a precedent. And like you said, when Issa won, all of a sudden everybody had a lat flare and they were trying to get that taper in, but we follow and we emulate. And I think that understanding of the criteria and what the judges are actually trying to achieve by picking a champion, as opposed to let's look like Issa, let's flare our lats and get that taper as wild as possible. Do you find, specifically with the US athletes, do you find that happens with your athletes? Are they starting to understand the sport better? Because I feel like us as UK athletes are a little bit behind.
Well, so here's the advantage. The IFBB home office is based in Pittsburgh, right? So we literally have almost all of the pro judges here in the United States. So on any given weekend, I see Tyler, I see Sandy, I see Tim Gardner, Joe Piscula, I see Bill Sibilia, all the Jack Sullivans. I see the judges that, you know, Becky Clausen. I see them every weekend. They judge our local shows, they judge our pro shows, they judge our national shows. And you'll see it right away. So we've got a show coming up here in Florida right after the Arnold. The Arnold is judged this year by Bill and Becky, right? So you're gonna see the standard there. Then it's going to be repeated at the Clash, the first pro bikini show here in Orlando. And then you've got a couple weeks later, the Pittsburgh Pro, and then you've got the first national show of the year for us, which is Junior USA Championships. It's a smaller show, but right away, everyone knows they're going to go a little bit softer, right? Because what tends to happen as the year goes on is girls get harder and harder because they keep doing shows. So for me, the last couple of years, it's been a little bit more predictable because I know the direction that they're going, and I've learned to stay after the shows. Sandy does not leave till the show is lights are kicked out and every athlete's gotten their feedback. So most athletes and coaches, the show's over, they want to go eat. No, like we've learned, like we stay until we get our feedback, and we're going to see them in a couple weeks, you know, whether it's they got their pro card and we're going to the pro stage, or whether it's we missed our pro card and we're trying to get it, right? So it becomes a lot more easy for us because we get that repetition. Whereas I see the results, you know, I look at all the pictures in Europe, and I have a coach on my staff named Stephen Beaugrand, and he's had multiple girls from pro in Europe. He's kind of like my European coach. He's got Chloe Marguerite, I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Yes.
I think she's out of Switzerland, but so he knows that they go a little bit harder over there. Even when the US judges go over there, you know, I've talked to them about that, and they say, well, the girls are just harder. So it's, even sometimes if the girl's really hard that wins, she still fit the standard the best that day. You know, so I think, what was the girl's name? Was it Valeria that everyone was excited about? She won like 3 shows.
And she won. She won her
pro card and 3 pro shows. And everyone thought she's a dark horse. She came over here for the Olympia, and I don't even think she got called out. It was last.
I think
she
was last
right?
call out. Yeah.
Which, I mean, when I saw her come out, I was like, wow, like that is a fantastic athlete. But either she wasn't full enough, she's a little taller. It's hard to stand out in a lineup with 54 Olympians, right? It's just hard to get noticed. Like there was girls I didn't notice that I'm friends with that I was like, oh wait, what call out were they in? Because you just start to miss. You start to think, and your brain's going. And there is psychology, and that's one thing I've really had to learn about the bikini division, is understanding the psychology of the frequency with which you compete and the quality with which you compete. Because once you start to get a reputation as looking a certain way, it's hard to undo that, right? You got to take time off. If you start to get known as someone who's too muscular, you got to atrophy. Someone who's too hard, you got to show them you can come in softer, right? So the psychology of the judging is very important to me. You've got to understand what the judges are looking for and make sure you're fitting that criteria. Otherwise, they just start to go, no, They know. They look at the lineups every week. I'm telling you, Sandy will be at a show in a different part of the country, and she'll see one of my athletes place well, and she'll text me and say, "Good job with Lana this weekend," and I'll be like, "Cool, thanks." So I know she's talking to the judges or looking at pictures.
That's incredible. I love how you do that, Paul. Like, and that's why you're at the level that you're at with bikini, is because you take the time to stay after shows and invest into the criteria and learn more. And a lot of people are upset that maybe their clients aren't winning, but they're not actually spending the time learning about the division and keeping up with it.
You got to remove your ego. It's hard, and I think a lot of coaches think, "Oh, I know best. I know what they want." And even to a degree, when some of my athletes turned pro in the past, I thought, "Yeah, I'm nailing this. I'm a great coach." And then you go get your butt kicked a couple times, and it brings you back down to earth, right? So I've learned to never get too high and get too excited, right? Like, even with the Raja finishing that Final Four this year, okay, what do we got to do? Let's get back to work. It's not like, yeah, we're on our way. No, it's like, let's keep doing what got us to this point and not get too confident.
Just keep learning and keep getting feedback over and over and over, because you can never be too right, in a kind of way. So you touched on, I know you have a like extensive kind of training knowledge as well, and I suppose I just want to ask you, you mentioned that like you kind of treat your athletes quite like bodybuilders as well, but when it comes to the training, obviously we are very, very different, and our goals are very different in what we want to grow and how we recover and all that kind of thing. But how would you kind of set up your training for your athletes in terms of, like, would it be specific to the individual, or is it kind of same kind of training approach? I suppose over here we're very into that kind of high intensity, low volume, and I know in the States it's like very, very high volume and variety of exercise. But how do you approach that with your athletes?
Yeah, so I've had the benefit of knowing some amazing people. I get to travel around and do seminars, and I'll never forget, maybe 6-7 years ago, I sent a girl a training program, and I got a message back, "Coach, I don't have a glute day." And I said, "Glute day? You have a leg day. You're doing quads, hamstrings, glutes are involved in that." "Oh, well, I was reading about this guy named Brett Contreras, and he says you should do a glute day." So the egotistical coach goes, "No, I'm your coach. I know better." That's not what I do. I email Brett Contreras and go, "Hey, my name is Paul Revelia. I coach bikini athletes. Can we meet and talk about how you train your athletes?" So we did, and we struck up a friendship. We started doing seminars together. Brett obviously is probably the most qualified person to talk about training glutes. And so a lot of that comes down to exercise selection, training frequency, and training intensity. Brett brings volume way down and brings frequency way up. So the first things first is you have to look at the athlete. Are they lower body dominant? Are they upper body dominant? Are they already perfectly balanced? If they're perfectly balanced, now we just want to accentuate the body parts that need to grow, the glutes, the shoulders, usually, maybe for some of the back, maybe quads, hamstrings. Typically what I'm having my athletes do, my philosophy is pretty well established with training now, is one upper body part, one lower body part per training block. We're training it 3 days per week. Now, if you're training a body part 3 days a week, something like a glute, you can't be doing squats 3 days a week. You won't recover. So the barbell hip thrust is a lot lower threshold for recovery. You also can't be doing tons of drop sets and going to failure. So, the thing that Brett loves is performance. He loves his athletes to get stronger through the process. He doesn't actually love the sport of bodybuilding because he saw it through the lens of, he was coaching a lot of people in California, and they had terrible relationships with their bodies, right? So he would get them nice and big and strong. Then they would go do a show and they would have a lot of self-hate. They would not like the way they looked. And he didn't like the fact that they got so skinny, as he would put it. So now that we've been friends for some years, he enjoys the sport now because he likes the way I do things. I try to focus on performance. Obviously you have to reach the right amount of conditioning, but I still try to keep everybody strong through prep. You should be hitting PRs, really up until the end. So yeah, my philosophy on training really is, if I'm training somebody 5 days a week, 3 of those days, especially for a bikini competitor, are going to be shoulder and glute focused for most girls. And I find that doing that, you keep and retain more muscle, but you're also not in the gym for 2.5 hours per session, right? That's really what a successful athlete should feel good going into the gym. You should not feel beat up and run down.
Yeah.
And those are things that I look for in my updates. What's your fatigue level? What's your stress, your recovery, all those things.
Yeah, I think fatigue management is such an important one as well, especially for a bikini athlete, because obviously you're talking about lower sort of muscle mass and things like that. But like you said, it can be the difference between an athlete coming in flat, an athlete coming in too full, spilled over even. So that fatigue management, I think maybe I could be a little bit naive in saying this, but I feel like as UK athletes and UK coaches, we've sort of got into bed with that over the last couple of years. Whereas I feel like that's been something that has been sort of running quite a long time out in the US. So from a training standpoint and sort of leading, because I know you deal specifically with a lot of natural athletes as well, Paul, how do you find, do you know the longevity of the preps and things like that? How do you manage things like fatigue, things like training and peaking your athletes over that length of time? Because I know Lorna in particular, she qualified, didn't she, for the Olympia within a year of turning pro, less than a year.
Yeah, Lana's a special case, so you could almost just do a podcast completely on her, because she specifically really responds well to diet breaks. So I don't look at prep as 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 20 weeks, right? Prep for me is not a linear process. It's not, we start here and we diet down to stage. We take multiple breaks throughout prep. I call them diet breaks, but they're essentially where you bring calories up to maintenance, drop cardio down to sometimes 50 to 25% of what you were doing. And you take these maintenance weeks and they really reestablish digestion, hormones, energy. In some cases, it can even be a social event, someone's birthday, someone's wedding, whatever it may need. But I find that those breaks really reinvigorate the athlete, and they make the prep better, but also the peak better and the post-show experience better, because they get to see what they look like with a few more carbs and a little bit less cardio. They just look and feel better for like a week. Oftentimes they'll even drop weight during that week, in which we can extend the diet break longer, right? It all depends on how far we are from stage and what we're working on. So yeah, the working with natural athletes, and even my athletes that aren't natural, we're on very minimal stuff. I work with a company out of the States. They get their blood work done, and if they want to get help building muscle, that's really the only thing we focus on. Conditioning is never a problem. When I talk about fatigue management, I don't do any high intensity cardio. None of my athletes do HIIT. I just found that between the combination of HIIT cardio multiple times per week, training, which is high intensity, restricting calories, having to do cardio, you still got to do your posing. And, you know, all the women I coach have lives outside of the sport, wives, mothers, sisters, friends, all those things, right? Business women. That's important too. Like the stress of not getting your work done or not keeping your house clean can build up, and you can start to feel like you're not doing enough. And guess what? You toss and turn at night, you don't get a good night's sleep. And, you know, I have a sleep score in my update for my athlete. What's your sleep score this week? Because I got to know if I start to notice these sleep scores are out of whack, I say, hey, let's take a couple days off from cardio and training, get your life in order, go to the store, you know, take care of your extracurriculars, and everyone just feels better when they have everything caught up. Right. So, Lana specifically, I almost don't like highlighting her because we did too many shows in a single year. But she's a bit of a freak of nature, right? She's got the insane ability to, you know, she competes at, let's say, 126 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos. Like 50,
60, maybe 60. 59, 60.
Yeah. So when we go into her off season, her weight goes up 8 or 9 pounds. She gets her cycle back. She puts on muscle, and she feels great. So the reason we were able to compete so frequently is because her life is so consistent. Her husband is also a competitor. She's a teacher. She just has such a basic routine. She gets 8 or 9 hours of sleep a night. She keeps her stress low. Her mom is wonderful. Her family is very involved in her life. Like, she just has a great foundation outside of the sport. And she doesn't take wins and losses particularly high or low. Right. So, you know, I've had some competitors that literally lost, you know, their first 2 shows. They didn't get first call outs. They were tired. I can't handle this. Right. Lana looks at the sport a little differently. She looks at it as like, I really just love the process. And I think those athletes tend to be a little more well-equipped to handle it. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing what she did, but literally within a month of getting off the Olympia stage, she had her cycle back and was only up like 5 pounds. So we're already talking about maybe we'll get on stage in October, November, which we were talking about taking a whole year off. But she also genetically is gifted because she's added a lot of muscle. Even though her stage weight is the same, I made a post on her on my Instagram. the girl added a significant amount of muscle while doing 14 shows in 18 months, which
her glute max
not everyone can
was
do.
crazy.
But
The
that's
glute
what happens.
development.
Yeah, when you have a good athlete or a great athlete on a great program who has a great foundation, you know, the sky's the limit.
Absolutely. I love how kind of specific you get with your athletes and looking at them as an individual, like you said, because we do have our lives outside, and you need to get kind of specific with that and how much you're putting on to that person, because at the end of the day, and I've experienced it myself, like stress will ultimately kill your body more than any amount of kind of cardio would do, you know, the stress off the back of that. So you definitely need to kind of have that under control. But I suppose you touched on Lana there, like how long you're spending in between seasons, but you talk to us a little bit about your approach to off season, because I know over here there's just a lot of controversy around it, and how long should bikini athletes take off, how much should we gain, you know, all that kind of thing. But what's your take on it? And even like the reverse dieting approach as well. I think Lane Norton kind of didn't come up with the idea of reverse dieting.
So I'll give you a little bit of a history, and that'll explain where we're at currently with how I handle things. So we're about to actually have a seminar, and I do a presentation called Current Best Practices for Contest Prep, and I go over this in detail. And one of these days I'll put it on the internet. I just haven't had time. But it's something that over a decade of coaching, I've come up with what I consider to be the best approach to prep, where you get the best result on stage and you come off stage not really needing to reverse diet, because you're already eating as much food as you were in the off season going into your show. However, it does require a little extra time in prep. You can't be in a rush. So the idea is that you get ready for your show early. You are ready before the show happens, and you can bring food up and cardio down. The body is different at that state. I know a lot, and it happened with me when I used to compete in shows. I would do a show, do my peak week, and I would notice that I would do a show 2 weeks later and I would look significantly better. And I could never figure out why. Well, it turns out the reason why was because I did that first show. I took a break. I gave myself a little bit of a recovery period. So that idea of reverse dieting that Lane had came from girls coming to him on 800 calories, 10 grams of fat, 2 hours of cardio. And then they would put 30, 40 pounds or, 15, 20 kilos on post show and be miserable, because now their metabolisms are kind of adapted to that approach. They can't even lose weight at 30 or 40 pounds. So what do? Trying to convince someone that's overweight that wants to lose weight to eat more is not easy. So the reverse diet allows you to not continue to add weight. You just add food incrementally each week, allowing you to maintain your body composition. And what would happen over time is, after a few months of this, the competitors would start to drop weight without trying to, because they would restore metabolic function, they would restore their sleep, they would restore their digestion, and mostly they just had to get back to good habits. Because a lot of people, especially when I started competing, it was almost like a part of the sport and accepted that you treat yourself like a jerk after the show. You go out to fast food, you eat like a jerk because you're very anabolic. Well, now we know that you're the least anabolic you've ever been after a show, and you're the most likely to store fat rapidly. So through that reverse dieting, we learned a lot. And then once the concept of taking diet breaks, once I started including that in my preps, I just started noticing that, well, the show is over. My competitor really doesn't even care to go out to eat. She's just right back on her plan. There's not this almost insatiable hunger happening. And my peaking has changed too. I call it a linear progressive load, where I basically, with most competitors, it's not always the case, but I literally will walk carbohydrates up every single day going into the show, keeping all other variables the same. Water the same. Sodium will go up a little bit as carbohydrates go up, just because sodium helps transport carbohydrates to your muscles. But by doing that, so imagine on Monday you're at 100 carbs, 150 carbs on peak week, and by show day you're at 275 or 300. You don't really want to go out to eat after the show. Most of my athletes are like, I'm like, what do you want to do? They're like, I don't care. I'm just going to go to my room. Well, that's a huge head start from someone who was depleted, dehydrated, and just went out and had 10,000 calories the night of their show. It's a huge difference, because you can store a lot of body fat and do a lot of damage in a short amount of time, both physically and emotionally. You can undo a lot of work. And it just changes the athlete. Now we have an athlete that's eating a lot of food at stage weight. We've got a little flexibility. We can do a couple more shows. And then when someone says, well, what does your reverse diet look like? Well, in that situation, that girl is eating 300 carbs the day of her show, the day before her show, she doesn't need a reverse diet. She's done it. And I always say this, if you wait till your show is over to start a reverse diet, you will not succeed. When you take the stage away, that really helps us with our decision making. Nothing helps decision making like saying you're going to wear this little tiny piece of clothing and stand next to a bunch of amazing athletes, right? You don't go off your plan. You don't miss your diet. You don't go to your sister's bachelorette party and get hammered, right? You make decisions that are going to, now, as soon as you take that show away, well, I don't really have a show. Let me just have this snack. Let me, so, but if you're already eating kind of off-season-ish numbers, yes, you're still hungry because you're lean, but at least you've got the volume, you've got the energy from the food. And so now you're starting your off-season in a better place.
I completely agree. I've experienced myself multiple times, like the approach you take on peak week ultimately dictates how the approach goes afterwards. And like we spoke about, that longevity, you don't want to cut your off season short. You don't want to start your next prep in a worse position, so I 100% agree there. And how long would your kind of off seasons usually be for bikini to make? I know obviously it differs between amateur and pro, but generally is it kind of, I suppose, context dependent and individual dependent?
Yeah, so I coach competitors that compete in our national physique or NPC circuit, right? So the regional shows, national shows, pro show, and then so the strategy is going to be different based on if you're an amateur or a pro, and then it's also going to be dependent on how young you are, what your training age is, right? So if I have an athlete that's already been training for a decade, she's not going to make progress in 6 months. I'm going to have to tell her to take a full year or more off. If I have an athlete that's been training for a year and she's already really good, if she takes a whole nother year off, 6 months, she's going to be dynamite, right? So it just comes down to the specifics of how they add muscle, because like the bikini division is the entry level division, but you still get some genetic anomalies that can put on muscle really quickly. And you find that out, and you're going to find out this year, because I've had a bunch of girls take an entire year off and they're coming back to these spring shows and they are dynamite. I've been making some posts about people like Maria and Elena, but I have a ton of them, right? And so it's exciting for me as a coach, because it's hard to not put really good athletes on stage, to say, you know what, you're going to sit out for a whole year. So that's for me a spot on my coaching roster where I'm not having someone get on stage this year, but I know that nothing matters until you walk out under those lights. The judges don't care how long you took off, how much you lifted, what your life looks like. They're just judging bodies. And when you take the time off and you come out and it's lights out, you notice right away. So I would say at least as long as you prepped. That is the minimum. If you did a 6-month prep, you cannot even think about dieting again for 6 months. That's my kind of rule of thumb. Now again, that's my rule of thumb. However, when you've got people like Daraja, people like Lana, now we got Brittany Hamilton, who's doing great things, Sally in Japan, we don't have a lot of opportunities with shows, right? So Daraja has to get qualified for the Olympia, so we have to already know in our minds what shows we're going to do. Same with Lana, same with Brittany. So but they're already pros. Their muscle's established. They don't need to put on 10 pounds of muscle. They need to just refine and adjust minor things. Whereas like some of my NPC competitors that got I had Maria, she got second at North Americans last year, 1 spot away from her pro card. Well, there was another national show 4 months away. And she and I were like, you know what, let's make it lights out. Let's take this time and really come back with vengeance versus just rushing to get back on stage again. So it literally comes down to, and this is why I do 30-minute consults with every person that I speak to. And depending on their training history, I have them work with Aspire Rejuvenation to, get their blood work done to see where we're at hormonally. Are we in a good position to add muscle? Do they need assistance? Do they need time? Do they need to just train more? So it's really hard to give like overarching feedback. And that's where, you have to have athletes that trust you, and are, in it for the sport, not just in it for the social media aspect.
Yeah.
No, coach, I just want to get back on stage because, there's the show coming up. And I was like, well, do you want to get back on stage or do you want to win? That's,
And I think from a psychological standpoint, we've covered it across a few things that you've said there, Paul, like obviously the reversing into a show from a psychological standpoint. I can imagine that only helps your athletes like move through into an off season and then having that understanding that not only your coach is on side for watching you, obviously, and encouraging you to grow and improve and things like that, psychologically, you can get comfortable with pushing that sort of direction by having somebody that's enforcing that kind of psychology. Whereas I can only imagine if you've got a coach, for example, and I'm spitfiring, but if you've got a coach that creates revenue by having people on stage, I think that can become a difficulty. And I know I've personally been in a cycle before with a previous coach where I felt like if I wasn't on stage, I wasn't seen, and that must be a really difficult thing. Do you find your bikini athletes come to you like that? Have they experienced things like that before? Yeah.
I definitely think that this is a business, and there are people that are coaching purely out of the business aspect, and you can tell by the way they talk about their athletes, they talk about the shows, they talk about their success or failures. You can just tell. Like, I'm a coach because I love coaching. I'm a competitor as well. If you have a coach who's competed, that changes the psychology of the coach. I understand. Honestly, for years, I had trouble pushing my athletes as hard as some of these other coaches were pushing them, because I understand the psychology of it. Now I've come to understand, okay, the conversation has to be, hey, this is what we need to do in this amount of time. Are you willing to do it? And if we both sign off, great. But I don't just assume that everybody's willing to do that, right? So it's almost like I want to get buy-in from my athletes. And I think the most successful people in the sport delay gratification. They don't need the instant gratification, right? Successful competitors have to understand that you have to enjoy the process as much as getting on the stage. You have to understand that if you don't get the result you want this time, it's no harm in taking a full year until you can come back and compete. But it is very common to find that position where coaches are going, oh, well, I was at this show with this many clients, and we're doing a great job, right? And you know, it is nice to have a lot of athletes at a show, but it's nicer to have a lot of athletes in the top of a show.
Absolutely. Before we get into just talking about your clients more detail in the Arnold's review, I want to ask, do you have any, I suppose, predictions with the future of the sport? Do you think that there's going to be this trajectory? I know you were talking about some athletes the muscle is so dense. And I think, is it Amy Vasquez that shocked everybody this last year, I suppose, with her tissue? But do you feel like that's the direction it's kind of going? And do us kind of amateurs need to work towards almost wellness glutes, I think we're seeing these days, or do you think it's kind of going back to previous criteria over the years, a little bit more of a softer look? What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're really trying to find that balance where you've got to be conditioned but full, right? So a lot of the girls are coming in very conditioned but not full. And so, there's still this stigma that carbohydrates are not great. I don't know. I hear some coaches are, anti-carbohydrates, whereas I'm like, the more carbohydrates I can give a competitor, the better they look. It's no coincidence that Daraja's best placing, we had the biggest carb up before the show, but we were also the leanest we'd been all year, the week of the Olympia, right? So getting an athlete to that position is really what allows them to look the way that they want them to look. So the criteria, I think they're really trying to keep it the same. Tyler loves conditioning, right? He wants to see the tie-in. However, they want to see the tie-in because the athlete's full, not because they're so over dieted that you can literally see through their skin. And I think there was a few years when I would go to national shows and that's all it was a dieting competition. The girls would be, emaciated, but they'd have tie-ins and they would be the ones that were placing. Now we're getting to the point where it's more of a bodybuilding competition. They want the bubbly muscles. And speaking of Amy, it was no surprise to me that she placed that way. She won the Tampa, and I was there, and I was in Nashville when she won, or she got second in Nashville. So I had seen her multiple times. And what you're seeing now is the athletes that have the best genetics. When you get on a stage with 54 people, what really stands out is that shoulder width, the taper, and that the upper outer volume of the glute, because that is pretty rare. If you look at the final four call out at the Olympia, they all had all of those things, right? And that's something that it just takes the most time to develop, is that upper glute. Now, feedback that we got from Daraja the year before was, your legs can come up a little bit. Your glutes came up. Now you can bring up your legs, right? So it comes down to the athlete making sure, and Daraja and I just did a podcast Friday, and that'll be coming out in the next couple of days, talking about her feedback specifically. And it's about creating a vision that I think, the champion this year, Maureen, did perfectly, where nothing stands out. And it's hard to say that because you're like, yeah, but she has great shoulders. She has great glutes. She's very beautiful. But you don't look at her and go, look at her this. You just go, wow, head to toe, right? And so that's really, each athlete's going to be a little bit different in that regard, what they're capable of putting on structurally, how much muscle they can handle, when they diet down, what starts to show, when they fill out, when do they look their best. And for me, that's what's the most fun about the competitions, is they're being judged on that day. So I when I first came into the sport, I felt like, oh, the show is judged before it even happens. You can write down the placings before the show happens, right? That's not the case anymore. Your name does not matter anymore.
No.
Daraja got fifth at the Tampa. That was her show to win. Everyone knew Daraja's show to win. She showed up off, she got moved out. And as disappointed as we both were, I said, this is a good sign, because there were years where I saw girls coming in off and winning shows that didn't deserve to win. So same thing at the Olympia. Everyone thought it was going to be Laura Lee, Maureen, Jen, right? That was just the accepted what was going to happen. And no, they didn't like the way Laura Lee looked. They moved her out. Same thing with Issa coming back as the champion. She moved to sixth, right? So I see it every weekend, because I go to all these pro shows and I see when they walk out under those lights, and it's not something you can even display on social media. It's like the naked eye test. There's like that wow factor when the athlete is tight and full and confident and their tan is right and their makeup is right. They just walk across the stage differently and you can't stop looking at them. And that's what happens at shows like the Olympia, is like, there are 8 or 10 girls. They picked 9 this year that fit that criteria. There was 9 girls, right? And so that they said, these are fitting the criteria today, right? And then even like Phoebe worked her way up into that first call out into what, 7th? So like, she ideally would have been in that first call out to compare with everybody, but it's hard to take, who are you taking out of the first call out? You're gonna take out Janet and Nisa?
Absolutely.
So,
like you said, you always just know when they walked out, and I got that Maureen, like when she walked out, I was like, that's it, you just know. But you touched on there the feedback, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about as well. And I know you have the podcast coming out, so I won't get into depth about that. But even when it comes to your 2 other athletes, wasn't it Lorna and Brittany was in the Olympia as well. Can you touch on a little bit about was there another one? Sorry if I forgot one, but was there
Sally Ann Cato lives in Japan. She was the first Japanese bikini Olympian. She's won the Japan Pro the last 2 years.
Oh, amazing. Okay. And what was their, I suppose, feedback in relation to the criteria they were looking for this year?
So they loved Lana's look. She had just been in front of all the judges, obviously. So she had done so many shows. Lana just needs to grow. She's not gifted with the structure of some of the girls. She doesn't have the tiny waist. She lost 2 weeks in a row to Jordan, who has, potentially one of the greatest, structures of the bikini division. So for her to overcome that, we tweaked her posing a little bit, but I think a little more size on her. She's a taller athlete, 5'6", 5'7". She competes around 126. So if we can just put another pound or 2 of muscle on her frame in the right areas, her legs can come up, her shoulders, that'll give her more of that like X frame, right? With Brittany, she was just a little burnout. We had done 4 shows early in the summer, right? And she had gone from 7th to 6th to 2nd to 1st to 2nd. So she did 5. And I think that was her first successful season. She had never even been in first callouts before. And there was a bit of a gap between that last show in October and the December show, just enough time for us to get in trouble. So we didn't get she was really doing her best at 126 pounds. She didn't quite get back down there. We got to like 130, right? So I think with her, they were like, you just weren't as tight. And when she's not as tight, it shows in her waist, right? So, and she's someone that a couple judges told me they had her in second callouts, right? So, she ended up in the third call out, but I think she's someone that this year, if we get a couple wins, she'll be fighting for one of those top 10 spots at the Olympia. That's our goal, right? And potentially even higher. Like, she's got that beauty factor. She's got the muscle, and she's got grace. And so she understands the division very well. So I think the bikini division can change very quickly. As you saw, like Miss Bikini Olympia 2019 got, I don't know what Issa got, 9th or 10th, 9th. Like that's
9th, I think.
That's pretty quick. And I think Issa will be back. She's a champion, but I'm saying, like, and Janet was the winner in 2020 and she got 8th, right? So like, you're starting to see like a little bit of a changing of the guard. So it can all swap in a year. You know, everyone thought Ashley Kay was done. She like started getting out of first call outs at the Olympia. Boom. Now she's third 2 years in a row. Like, so, you know, you forget that these people are champions and athletes, and they have a mindset that very few people have. So it's going to be fun for me to see what Brittany does, because now she's on the cusp of being one of the girls that everyone sees. You know, everyone knows the girls. You look at the list and you go, oh, it's between this, and everyone knows those people. She's on that list now. So is Lana. Like once you go to the Olympia, you are forever, you know, as a coach, when I'm backstage, you hear girls go, oh, she's an Olympian. She's an Olympian. You know, there's 40 girls at these shows. Half of them just turned pro. The other half have never been in first call outs. Everyone knows who the Olympians are, right? So to get into that first call out is a true honor. That's one thing I love about the bikini division. There's so many like layers to it, right? So I think my job with Lana and with Brittany and with Sally is to, you know, the conditioning could have been a little better on Brittany. I think a little bit tighter. Lana's feedback, just need more. Like she's stunning, she's captivating. But it's also just, you know, when you're standing up there with the elite bikini competitors at the Olympia, it's just hard. You know, like, how do you move into that? You've just got to build your reputation. And Sally, again, I thought actually fit the criteria very well for what they did. If you look at her pictures, we just needed to be a little bit tighter. You know, and it was, you know, it was a travel issue with her. She didn't get over till Wednesday. She came to Brett's house to train with me. We didn't really have time to make any adjustments. She looked great. She ended up in the fourth call out. Or was it fifth? I think she was in fifth. But out of 8 call outs. So I was happy with that. Like they all got noticed, you know, none of them got ignored. So with her, it's just continuing to refine. But, you know, I think all the short girls out there were like, hell yeah, when Maureen won, because they thought, okay, we've got a place in the sport.
Yeah, for sure. And we haven't touched, well, we have touched on Dayraja, but just to sort of take in her success this year as well, and especially on the back of, I know she did Texas previous, the week before, and there was visibly quite a lot of changes and big differences between Dayraja's appearance on the Olympia stage. So I know she's spoken openly just about PCOS and other things that she sort of battles, but just talk us through sort of that week leading into the Olympia. Was there sort of a hone in on her mindset and to bring her back into sort of a place where she felt confident going into that show?
Yeah, she felt really confident going into Texas. So earlier in the year, we talked about this on our podcast a little bit. Her doctor, because of her PCOS, had been prescribing her low doses of estrogen, right? And we just kept noticing we were hitting a ceiling in prep. We could never get below a certain body fat percentage. Every time we would hit that ceiling, she would have like an outburst. Well, she finally decided, you know, midway through the year, she's like, you know, and she was getting married, and she just said, I'm going to stop taking the estrogen, stop adding the estrogen into my body. The second she did that, literally, her body just started dropping weight. She started getting harder. So by the time her wedding was over, we had, I think, 8 weeks until Texas. And we had to do that show because we wanted to be able to nail it. We hadn't been on stage since the Sasquatch show. So going into Texas, we were super confident. She looked amazing. And Phoebe, rightfully so, won the show. But we were thrilled with how Dayraja looked that day. And honestly, there's very little that motivates a top level competitor like not winning.
Yeah.
So let's just say we win that show and we get comfortable.
Very true.
We might be getting 10th at the Olympia, 8th at the Olympia, right? We flew. So we got up on Sunday morning. So the show was Saturday. The Olympia was the following Saturday. We were in Texas. We literally got up on Sunday morning, did an hour of cardio. I did it with her because I like cardio. Flew to Vegas, landed, went to the grocery store, got a gym membership at the gym by Brett Contreras' house. We stayed at Brett's house, did another hour of cardio and a workout. We had her, you know, pull back her calories. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, we depleted, and she was dropping almost like a half a pound every day. And by Thursday morning, when she woke up, it was the lightest she'd been in years. And we were both like, this is it. Like, I mean, I have the pictures of I get the chills still thinking about it. Like, I just, when an athlete works that hard and gets the result thereafter, I told her the day of the Olympia, I said, I don't even care. I don't care where they place you today, because you've done what they've asked. This is the vision that they have for you. And that's one thing I love about the judges. They know these athletes so well that sometimes they're comparing them to themselves, right? They looked at Dayraja and, you know, she told me when she walked out, that she goes, I just got the nod. Like, you know, they don't go like, hey, good job. They just look at you and they look up and down and they just go like, yep, you did it. Right. So she's like, I knew I would be looked at because I got the nod when I walked out. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's, you know, the nice thing was we were in Vegas. We had nothing to do. We were staying at Brett Contreras' house. He wasn't even there. There was no one there but us. And he has like a monster house with a 4-car garage that's all a gym. And so we were literally like in a prep bubble. She was going outside and meditating in the backyard. We were doing cardio. We would go for walks. We would go to the gym just to do our cardio to get out of the house and then come back to the gym. You know, so it was a nice, you know, we've even talked about it in the years ahead, you know, depending on how many Olympians we have, we might just rent a house in the city where the Olympia is, like this year in Orlando, for like 10 days going into the Olympia, just to get out of the rat race of life, you know, because a lot of women put other people's stresses on themselves and carry that. And she's like, yeah, not being home, I didn't have to think about my dogs, I didn't have to think about my husband. Like, just for that amount of time, it just allowed her to get better. So yeah, it's
incredible. You know, it just goes to show how much can happen in a week. And I know people always say, you know, like, you're not meant to be pushing on peak week, but if the mindset is there and it's in a good place, and like you said, you're doing all these like relaxation tools, like you can get the result you want. You can completely turn, you know, it's on its side, you know, the kind of way. And she has done incredible. I even actually, I was in Texas in August for, I think it was the Texas Pro, and I saw her win there, and it was incredible. See, it was my first kind of pro show, and to see live.
So you saw Andrew Jacked too. That was
he's incredible. Yeah.
My prediction is he's gonna win the Arnold. He is incredible.
Crazy.
It was amazing even to see Daraja in person, you know, and the glam. And in my opinion, I think she's the best posing, one of the best posers as well. So she's phenomenal.
She works very hard at that. It's not an accident that she's so comfortable in her posing. And even that show, you know, Tyler was there and he came backstage. He said, much better than Tampa. You still need to be tighter. Right. So we did another show after that. So I think at the pro level, you're constantly looking for that feedback of like, this is the look to bring to the Olympia. And if we had got that at Tampa or Texas, we would have been done. Right. But we never got it. So we were still chasing it. We honestly didn't get it until the Olympia.
Perfect time to get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the Olympia, all they said was, you know, compared to the top 4, because now you're talking about the standard for the entire division, they're like hamstrings a little bit more dominant than the glutes. So if the hamstrings stay the same, the glutes have to come up. Right. So we're playing with fractions now. And she's obviously one of the girls that they're looking at the top of the sport. So we're just going to, you know, keep fine tuning things.
Incredible. She's not on the Arnold list this year, unfortunately. We would have loved to see her up there, but we'd love to get I suppose your predictions with the Arnold, which is how many weeks now is it? Are we 4 weeks out?
Four.
Mad. I can't believe how fast it's come around. But I'll just pull up the little diagram that I did.
Yeah, the Arnold, we decided not to do that. There was only 9 weeks between. And I think the difficulty is in 9 weeks, you can not make much improvements. I mean, she could have come in a little bit leaner, you know, so we would have fought for that. But ultimately, she still needs a little more glute development. So do we spend 10 weeks dieting down or 10 weeks growing? As much as I love the Arnold, our goal is to win the Olympia, right? And Maureen just won the Olympia, never won the Arnold, right? So it used to be like this unspoken rule that you won the Arnold first and then you won the Olympia, because they were so far apart. The Olympia champion usually wouldn't do the show in September, win the Olympia, and do the Arnold. They would usually stop competing. This year was unique, but you know, Daraja had her honeymoon planned around that time, and we need to make improvements, so it worked out. And then when this list came out, I was like, it would have been nice to do it, but I mean, you basically have 5 of the top 7 Olympians, so it's not a chance to leapfrog a bunch of people that aren't there or to, you know, get noticed. So in my mind, I was like, we made the right decision, you know, because now we've got a head start on the off season.
Absolutely. So I don't know, can you see all the athletes here?
Yeah, that looks great. That's very cool.
So I've just put down what I think my top 5 are, but this is just 5 of the athletes here. Paul, where do you think your top 5 is at?
You know, I don't think that there's enough time to knock off the champ. I think Maureen is very fresh. She did not compete all year since March. She did the Boston show, shut it down, came out for the Olympia. So whatever feedback she would have gotten, if they told her to do anything, it's going to be very easy for her to tighten, to fuller, to whatever the feedback. And I don't know what the feedback was. Those are just, you know, throwing out terms. But I think it's going to be very hard for anything to happen, because Jennifer came in her best look that I've ever seen her in person. First time I've ever seen her walk out on stage and thought, wow, she's always very balanced. But that was the first time that I thought, man, she really, like, that time off did her good. Like, her new approach to prep has worked wonders. The fact that they didn't give her the title, or that Maureen beat her out, it was obviously a very close decision between those two. And I think it's towards the end of prejudging is when it happened, because at the beginning Maureen wasn't even in the middle, right? They swapped her in with Ashley. So I think we all thought, everyone in the whole world thought, it's Jen's show, they're trying to figure out second. So but if you're saying that Maureen was the standard 9-10 weeks ago, unless she shows up off, and I don't think we've ever seen Maureen show up off. I've seen her in Tampa. I've seen her, she did the same, she beat Daraja at Janet's Battle of the Bodies. I was there. You know, I've seen her compete at the Arnold, at the Olympia multiple times. You've never seen her off. She's very consistent. So if that's the case, you have to go with, okay, she's the champ, she's the standard. Agreed. Where you get into some interesting things is like, okay, Laura Lee was the standard. She won Pittsburgh. She won the Arnold. She won the New York. Everyone thought she was coming for that title. If she corrects that, is she then beating Maureen? Because she beat her at the Arnold. So I think really the biggest discussion is, what does Laura Lee do differently? Because she's the biggest wild card. I thought Ashley was on, Phoebe was on, everyone was on, and Laura Lee looked really good. Now I just got a new prescription. It's really funny. So when I was at the Olympia, my vision was not 100%, and I was, you know, a few rows back. I couldn't see what they were looking at. And when I talked to Laura Lee after, she said, yeah, they said I was a little too hard and not full enough. So, you know, she makes that minor adjustment. She's obviously going to be in the mix. So can she overtake Maureen if Maureen brings the same package, or even slightly better? That, to me, that's the battle. It's between Laura Lee's past self and Maureen being consistent. I just don't know, unless Jen makes an adjustment that they wanted her to make. Maybe they ask her to be fuller. Maybe they ask her to, you know, her front pose, she looks a little tilted to me, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I don't know if that's been her feedback, but it just looks like she's leaning, and that throws off her shoulder balance. And if you look in this picture, how wide Maureen's shoulders look versus Jen's, and again, these aren't like side by sides on stage, so it's hard to compare. But you know, but when you're talking about hairline decisions, you know, and then so to me, it's Maureen's show, and then the question mark is Laura Lee. Can she do what they want her to do? Because she could win the show. Like, literally, I think the first 4 you have there could win the show. Probably the first 3. I don't think Ashley has beaten any of them recently, in my mind. I don't think she's beaten Laura Lee, Jen, or Maureen in the last couple of years. I could be wrong. But you start to look at those patterns of who can beat who.
And it really is like how they are on the day. Because I agree. I think if Laura Lee can bring her 100%, I do think she has, and I would love to see her take it again. But it really just depends, you know. I think that's what's so exciting about bikini, really, is it? Like like those adjustments can just be made in a couple of weeks, and you just never know, you know. And there's been a different.
Well, the show is on the East Coast, so the Olympia, for those that don't go, Vegas is a desert, and it's also like 4,000 or 5,000 foot elevation, so it's very dry there, and the venues are all very far apart. So like, you're walking to makeup, it can be 20 minutes, and you know, sometimes you don't account for that. And so she might have just flattened out, being more active and being at a higher elevation. Now we're going to go to the East Coast, to Ohio, where Laura Lee lives on the East Coast. She lives in Florida, same time zone. It might just be more comfortable for her. I think Maureen lives in LA, right? So maybe Vegas kind of favored her a little bit, you know, like, these little tiny things matter. And, you know, they're all going to show up looking amazing. But yeah, the eye test on the, like, I cannot wait for prejudging. Like, are you guys going to be there at the Arnold?
We'll be watching.
Our goal for next year.
That environment, when you only have 10 competitors, it's really fun. Right? When there's 54 at the Olympia, it's like, by the time they get through with groups and the routines start, you know, you've got an hour until call outs. With this show, it's 2 groups, 10 routines, and call outs. You've got 10 minutes after the show starts, they're doing call outs, right? And you're seeing them move people around. So it happens quick, and the crowd really gets into it.
I can't wait. Especially for Laura Lee, I think as well. Like, I've followed so many of these athletes for such a long time, but Laura Lee, I really feel like is just a hairline away. Like, she got so close, and obviously she won the Arnold's last year. So to see her come in that little bit harder, it wasn't necessarily something that I expected at the Olympia at all. But I think to sort of reinstate her, she has such a massive persona and such a massive sort of character in bikini anyway. She is such an icon of the sport. So I'm, as much as I would love to see Maureen take it, and I'm a huge fan of her physique and her package, but I think there's something rooting for Laura Lee for me.
Yeah, and I mean,
must say.
So let's look at the next 5, because I feel like there's some sneaky people on this list that so Ivana Eskandar is very interesting because she was, and apologies to her, I don't know her. I mean, we've met and chatted, but I think she was very flat. She didn't have the bubble that she normally does. I saw her compete a few times last year, and she would be very different. One show she'd be very tight and hard. The next show she'd be very full. And when she brought that full look, so if Ivana brings that big full look, I think she could sneak into that top 4, right? Like she's out of all these girls. Ellie is just very tiny. She's always on though. Romina's another one. I think she surprised people being in the top 10 at the Olympia because she only just qualified a few weeks before, but she fits the standard so well. Like, she's like, if you take Maureen and her side by side, I think they're structurally very similar, right? So if she brings a look that they love, she's won the New York Pro, she's placed, but I don't know that anybody on this list can crack that top 3, because I wouldn't expect Maureen, Jen, and Laura Lee and Ashley to be off like that. That's just not happening. They're very consistent. So, but I agree with your assessment. I think the fight will be for that 5th spot between Phoebe, Ivana, and Romina.
What just as we on the topic of Phoebe, and she's like our UK athlete, that we all look up to, but how do you have any kind of, I suppose, feedback on her physique? She won the Arnold Classic in the UK in 2021, if I remember correctly. She did compete at the last Arnold, but I don't think she placed as high as
she wasn't ready.
Liked.
So I don't know. Phoebe and I struck up a friendship a couple years ago. I don't recall how, but she's just one of those people. Like, she's lovely to be around. She's great to talk to. She's very, just a great personality. She's, sometimes, you travel around to all these shows and you just start to click with people. I've always clicked with Phoebe, really always admired her physique. And, when I saw her at the Arnold last year, she was like, yeah, we really fought to get down to even close, but that wasn't her best look, right? She knew it. I think maybe it was surprised that she got on that list. And so she wasn't like prepping for it. But I think what it did was it set her up to come out of that show with a very clear purpose to be successful, right? To come into Texas. Seeing her stand side by side with Daraja in Texas, it was between them pretty clearly. Phoebe's a taller athlete, and I think Daraja's just a little more bubbly at this point. So I think, Phoebe just continues to evolve. She's going to be a staple in that first call out at the Olympia. Like, I feel like she's, her and Adam have figured out her body, how to get her conditioning and fullness right on stage. So yeah, she's just, and she's another one of those girls, when it comes down to the top girls in the world, structure stands out. I mean, look at her structure. I mean, in this front pose, from the waist up, she might have the best structure, right? She doesn't have the fullness to the glute yet and the legs, but I mean, put a little bit of Laura Lee on her and you can see her winning some big shows, right? And that's just what this sport is. And she has the right attitude. She's in it for the long haul. She's not a make it or break it from show to show. She's a lifetime competitor. You can tell she loves the process. So yeah, big fan of Phoebe's. And, I'm sure the thing about competitors is it's all about the motivation. What's your motivation? As soon as the Olympia ended, her motivation was that the Arnold ready, right? She knew. So like, I think they're going to be on. Like, athletes get better when they stay in prep longer, especially of this caliber.
Yeah, it'll be interesting with Phoebe, because obviously Maureen is a shorter athlete, and when we did the last kind of Olympia review, we noticed that like the top three were kind of shorter as well. So I think, you know, sometimes the height can go in your favor and sometimes not. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how she stands up against the rest of them.
Yeah, you get nervous as a coach when like the winners of the Olympia are like, you know, the first call out is like Janet and Laura Lee, because you can't make yourself taller. So I think, like I said, this year, everybody got excited because Maureen was the shortest. Like Daraja towers over Maureen like several inches. I don't know if she's 5 feet tall even, maybe right around 5 foot, right? So like, but it's the structure for Maureen. Like her structure is crazy and she's stunning. She's beautiful. So like, you know, you that's one thing I love about the bikini division. Like you don't typically see in bodybuilding a 6 foot guy and a 5 foot guy battling it out, right? Whereas like in bikini, that's the case because the physiques are so specific to the individual that fit the criteria. So it's going to be really fun to see how that evolves. Now, if Maureen is the standard, does that mean Romina, Evie, and Eli Fernandez are now going to be moving up at this? You know, there's a lot. The sport changes quickly, so we'll see.
Yeah, really looking forward to it, I have to say. Amazing, Paul. Thank you for all that. It's so good to hear your insight into everything. Like I said, I think over in the UK we're sometimes a little bit behind, and it's really good to talk to the US coaches, you know, a lot more experience, you know, bikini so well. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, go to the pro shows. Any coaches out there, any people out there that want to learn the sport, go to the pro shows. Because if you don't know this, when there's a pro show, the IFBB Pro League sends a pro judge, and it's usually an American. There's usually a pro American head judge going over to Europe. It's often Bill Sibilia, Jack Sullivan, sometimes Tyler and Etta go too, right? So you can go there and get feedback directly from them. You know, put your amateurs in the shows where the pros are.
Yeah, I've been in front of Bill.
Noticed before you turn pro. You can build a reputation before you turn pro. That can help you, and you can learn the sport that way. It's really what helped me. You know, I had my first pros were like 2016, 2017, and it took me a few years to understand what the pro league was after. But that's when I reached out to the judges, and that's when I started getting involved more in the sport, and it really helped me. After the shows, they would be like, "Hey, Paul, do you have any questions?" Cool. Yeah. Okay, why did this person place here versus here? This the tan, the hair, you know, like little things. Like they really will tell you. There's no secrets.
Yeah. I've been in front of Bill a couple of times. I think you have as well, Jade. And afterwards, I'm like picking his brains, and that's what you have to do, especially as an amateur, you know. So it's really, really good, helpful advice for coaches out there.
I think Becky Clausen does a lot of the European shows as well, because she was at the Amateur Olympia as well. So Becky Clausen's another one, just from like her feedback as well on the bikini division itself, and the rhetoric that it is the same. The criteria remains the same. It is like you say, Paul. It's the individual. It's the body. It's the frame. Everything matters. But like we say, it's the beauty of the sport. As much as it's difficult to get it right, it's about getting it right for your body, as opposed to emulating something else. So yeah, very, very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you
so much. It's
a
fun division to be involved in and coach, and like the community is amazing. Like I love walking backstage and just chatting with people. Like I you know, it's just a fun, I look forward to the shows. Like I couldn't do what I do every weekend if I didn't literally love being back there and learning. And so, yeah, hopefully we get to cross paths this year.
Absolutely. Yes, well, no, that's exactly why we wanted to have you on, is your passion for bikini. And I feel like more coaches who coach us need to be like you. So it's great to hear everything. And do you want to tell the listeners where we can find you to learn a little bit more? And I know you mentioned your podcast, so we might link that in the description below, because I know everybody will want to listen. But where can everybody find you, Paul?
Yeah, so our podcast is called the Pro Physique Code, and it's multifaceted. You know, I'll do one-on-one interviews with athletes and judges and coaches and stuff like that, or even just personalities. But we also have, you know, of our 30 coaches, a lot of them are very well educated, great coaches themselves. So we have lifestyle podcasts and stuff like that. So lots of ranges of topics. But my primary information is either Instagram or YouTube, and they're both just Paul Revelia. And so I try to do show day vlogs. I try to share the sport. I try to put out a lot of information on my Instagram. It's hard when you're in it coaching to like stop and take 2 hours to make a post. But if I see something that I feel like is worth mentioning, I'll put it on my Instagram. But YouTube is I love to chat and explain my reasons behind things. So my YouTube channel, I've done 1,400 videos over the last 15 years. So there's lots of information on there. So yeah, I'm excited this year to do some show day vlogs, and
Okay.
you know, I like showing that stuff.
Amazing.
For
Cannot
sure.
wait to keep up with it over the next few months. But again, thank you so much for your time, Paul, and we'll speak soon.